Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you at the Communicate conference. Thanks for having us. My name's Helen Meech. I'm Head of Movement Building for RSPB and currently leading our work around a really exciting project called Wild Isles, working closely with my colleague Emma.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma. I'm Head of Public Engagement Campaigns at WWF-UK. And yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about Wild Isles and the People's Plan with Helen today. So I'll kick off. So the first question you might be asking is, what is Wild Isles? So Wild Isles is an integrated campaign that's being led between RSPB and WWF, hence why you've got Helen and I today. It's also in partnership with the National Trust. So it's basically a campaign that's going to be centred around a UK nature documentary series, which will be broadcast on BBC in early 2023 and narrated by Sir David Attenborough. It's produced by Silverback Films, who are one of the most eminent filmmakers. So they've produced everything from Blue Planet, Frozen Planet, Planet Earth. So they kind of really know their stuff. It's incredible filmmaking and storytelling. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of highlight UK nature and kickstart action to basically try and save it. So why do we need to do this? It's because we need to hit some 2030 nature targets. I think you'll kind of know that there's lots of big targets that have been talked about for 2030, and that's the year that we want to have all of these this change have happened by. But the reality is that we're on the path and not enough action has been taken. So we know that next year we really need to scale that up if we have any chance of hitting those targets. And this is a real opportunity for us to basically win over people's hearts and minds through a kind of enigmatic storytelling and take them on that path to nature positive. And so it's about that kind of positive people power coming together to drive some change. And essentially we want to do that because we want to build a movement which can't be ignored by decision makers. So there's lots of different people in power, be that kind of business leaders, local or national governments, but essentially all of them are going to need to play their part if we really have a chance to save UK nature. Now you may ask, does UK nature actually really need saving? The answer is yes. We've actually just done some audience testing and the stats are pretty dire. We don't want to like hone in on the negativity, but I think a lot of people don't really realise the state of UK nature and what we maybe once had and what we've lost. So it's quite shocking to know that the UK is actually in the bottom 10% of countries globally when you look at how much biodiversity we have left. But actually it's home to some amazing species. And the millions of people here have a real power to make a difference. So we may have lost, 97% of our wildflowers, which is a pretty shocking stat. But actually we can do something about it, and we have to essentially, because saving nature means saving ourselves. And so, it's not just about nice to have wildlife, but actually it's about us having fresh water, clean air. All of those things are essential to our health and well-being as well. So that being said, our mission is we want to make it socially, politically and economically unacceptable to destroy nature and to normalise action which brings UK nature back to life. So it's really that kind of positive angle which is so important for us. We want people to think that UK nature is vital, valuable, but that actually it's really vulnerable. And we want them to feel connected to nature, that they can be hopeful that positive change is possible. I think we've all kind of seen documentary series of the past and campaigns surrounding it, and often we're all left feeling a little bit kind of in despair and feeling like the issue is too big to deal with. So we want people to feel that actually there is a positive role that they can play in this, and then we want them to do by actually playing an active role in bringing that nature back. So it's about getting people up off their sofas and back out into their communities with their family and friends and actually making a difference for UK nature. That being said, what's our kind of campaign rallying cry? So our Wild Isles campaign is about urgent action, because essentially we can be the first generation that leaves our Wild Isles in better shape than we found them. So that's going to be the kind of rallying cry that comes off the back of the TV series and into this UK nature campaign that us are leading, but in partnership, we hope, with lots of other organisations who will come together and amplify that as well. Basically, UK nature has been pushed to the very brink. And that people may have been a part of that problem, but we can therefore also be part of the solution. So that's really important for us, that if this is human made, it can be human solved. And essentially the nature crisis affects us all because it's our home and our responsibility to protect it. So in one of the world's most nature depleted countries, we know that everyone can play their part. So it kind of doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you can do is do something positive. So it may be as simple as I don't know, turning part of your garden and creating a pond, or it may be about kind of creating a community allotment with your neighbours, but there's loads of different ways that you can get involved, be that through your children's school or whatever it is. We know that everyone has a part to play, but that part may be slightly different depending on who you are and where you are. And we have to acknowledge as well that it's obviously not as exclusive and accessible for everyone as well. So making sure that we are kind of understanding those barriers, being very audience and people led, make sure that this is truly co-created. And what's our impact? So we want to create this national conversation about UK nature. We want it to transcend to mass audiences. This is really important for us. Often lots of those already engaged audiences understand these issues, but for us, this is about reaching the mainstream basically and normalising that action. And it will support the recommendations of People's Plan, which Helen will talk to you about in a second. It's about actively reaching new and diverse audiences. So as I mentioned, it's not inclusive, the environmental sector, and so therefore we need to be opening doors to those networks to secure new partnerships and basically put people at the heart of our story. So that's really important for us. I think we all kind of know that enigmatic animals can win over that storytelling, but how are we putting people in the frame is so important. And of course, we want to drive advocacy and policy impact. So within different audiences and different sectors, that will look slightly differently, but knowing that whether you're a business leader or a politician, there's all kinds of different things we need to do. And we have this, we talk about it as the triple challenge, which is basically that you can't fix the nature crisis without looking at the climate crisis and how we produce our food at the same time. So the three are intrinsically linked. And so to do that, we'll be calling on decision makers from those different sectors who can play those parts and bring it all together in an aligned plan. And of course, we'll do it with people. So I previously worked on the Our Planet series with Netflix and the David Attenborough Life on Our Planet film. And what we really learned from that is people want to play a role. They're just kind of, they say, you know, what can I do? How can I get out involved in this? And so that's really, really important, is to mobilise that people power and ensure that it drives some more systemic change, so that it's not just kind of lovely things that people want to do. So, you know, off the back of Blue Planet, people kind of got really passionate about banning plastic straws, and that was brilliant, but it didn't obviously solve the plastic crisis. So in the same way, we need to make sure that we're mobilising that action for that bigger systemic change. And to do that, we need to meet people where they are. We need to take them on a journey to be more impactful and to include action at the start of that. And to do that, we'll create collective agency and build a bigger mandate that decision makers basically can't ignore. And how we'll do that, I'll pass over to Helen.
Thanks, Emma. This is a bit of a geeky slide, but it's an important one. So this sets out our theory of change. At the very, very top, you've got the BBC, and that is the Wild Isles series. So, you know, this is going to be incredible documentary footage showing the awe and wonder that is UK nature, which we feel is really going to help build that awareness of just the incredible diversity of nature that we have here in the UK, and people are not going to be just going to not help themselves. They're going to fall in love with it. It's going to be amazing. And so then around that, we want to then start to build what we're calling a kind of halo campaign. So how do we start to transition that deep love of UK nature into increased concern and intention to act? And we're planning lots of engagement activity to take people on that journey from love, awareness, and then through to intention to act. Then crucially, we are kind of building these three boxes that sit in the middle with people through a project called the People's Plan for Nature, which I'm just about to talk a lot more about. But this is all about mobilising people to take nature positive action. As Emma said, that's going to look different for different people where they are, but what is really really important to us is that we're both supporting change on the ground through direct delivery of projects and initiatives, but crucially we're also using that to leverage change in the system. We know that mass systemic change is needed to meet that triple challenge and to keep us on track for net zero and to move towards a nature positive future. So we'll be both looking at that kind of change on the ground and systems change in parallel. Next slide, please, Anne. So the People's Plan for Nature, very excited to share more about this with you today. You might have heard about it, you might have read about it in paper, you might have even seen one of our ideas trees around the country. It's a three-stage process, and it's all about working together with the UK public to build a nature positive future. So we started back in September with our first phase, and that was all around building momentum through a national conversation to really understand where our audiences are. Emma talked about the importance of meeting our audience where we are, and that's a big part of what this was about, is understanding how do people currently relate to nature, what role does it play within their everyday lives, and we work with them to sort of also understand how they like the future to be. and how is that different from now? We've then packaged up that conversation and we've fed it into the UK's first ever Citizens' Assembly on Nature, which we're calling the People's Assembly for Nature, which is going to be meeting over the course of 4 months and make recommendations for action needed across the system. We'll then be launching the People's Plan for Nature in February next year and inviting others to respond to the recommendations. This is the People's Plan for Nature. I think that's a really key thing to say, that RSPB has come together with WWF and the National Trust to convene this process, but it is not our process. What we're doing is creating a platform for people to come together, explore these issues together, and to come up with recommendations for change. So they're going to look at what's the role of national governments, both the UK government and the devolved governments. They're going to look at the role of local government, who obviously have a huge role to play in the management of nature. They're going to look at the role of business, particularly focusing on the food and farming industry, given that 70% of our land is farmed. And they're going to look at the role of citizens and communities, but they're also going to look at the role of us. We want our feet to be held to the fire as part of this process as well. We hope we're getting some things right, but we know we're not getting it all right. So we really want these citizens to tell us what more do we need to do, what less do we need to do, and how can we do more to support them to create this nature positive future that we all want and need. And then when Wild Isles hits our screens, likely to be in March next year, that's when we launch a campaign, and we have committed that we will help support the implementation of the People's Plan for Nature through the campaign that we build around the Wild Isles TV series. But just to tell you a bit more about the national conversation. So it ran from the 30th of September to the 30th of October. It started just over 6 weeks ago. And it ran both online. We created a bespoke website, peoplesplanfornature.org. We ran a social media campaign. You can see a couple of some of the social ads that we used here. And also we worked with, we placed these, you can see one of the pictures here, cardboard tree, and we placed these tree installations in over 70 locations across the UK, and really worked hard to try and get beyond your traditional nature organisation audience. So we work with future art centres, who have art centres. It's a network of art centres across the UK who are very embedded within community. We work with them, we work with football clubs, we worked with a couple of local councils, we worked with a co-op group to get these into places where people who might not always have a voice on nature, to really try and reach them. And we also use targeted advertising online to try and get beyond our nature bubble. And this conversation was really about sparking conversation and really kept creating a snapshot of public opinion to be shared with our Citizens' Assembly. We're very clear that this is not a representative sample, but this is just about really understanding, for those who felt moved to answer these questions, what nature means for them. And the questions that we asked were, what do you love about nature in the UK? And what would you miss if it disappeared? We invited people to put themselves into the future, to imagine it's 2050 and nature is thriving, and to really understand what's different from now. And then thirdly, we asked people to share exciting examples they've seen of people working together to restore and protect nature in the UK. We know there are brilliant people out there doing brilliant things, and so we really wanted to kind of crowdsource the best of what's already happening. And we're now just going to show you a quick video clip that just gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the things that have been coming through that national conversation.
The little birds, the animals.
We have a beautiful coastline.
Bird song.
Seeing it all and having picnics.
And it's very good for my mental health just to take time out and relax.
A loss of nature in Scotland would be a loss of part of our national identity.
If it disappeared, I would miss the smells, the touch, the colours, as it makes you really, really happy.
I love to see there being a lot more conversation around rewilding and ecosystem restoration, biodiversity, planting trees.
Green spaces, to see nature thrive, to see deers, hedgehogs, whatever it is.
They've reintroduced beavers in Scotland, and I think that's quite an amazing thing.
It would be nice to see if there was more funding and more backing from the government, so that would be amazing if they could kind of also put that at the top of their agendas.
I think that we have the ability to stop and turn things around. I'm excited for us to step into that role.
Thanks, Emma. So yeah, that little video montage just gives you a bit of a feeling of some of the things that came through. We've also been working with one of our partners, the New Citizenship Project, to go through and analyse those submissions. We had nearly 30,000 submissions with a really good representation from across the UK. And we've been working with the New Citizenship Project to really analyse what the key themes were that are coming through. So in response to that first question around what do you love about nature, lots of stuff around the importance of nature for people's mental health, how it relieves stress, it kind of gives them a break from the day-to-day. Lots of stuff around how nature isn't a resource, it's something that people feel they just absolutely can't live without. And of course, lots of people talked about their own personal connection to nature. And for a lot of people, that's a really core part of their identity, both personal identity and cultural identity. That came through really, really strongly. When we looked to the future, there were sort of 4 key themes that started to come through. So a need to change the way that we produce things, a need to think differently about how we use green space, lots around policy and the need for better economic and policy outcomes for nature, and then the need for more bottom-up and community-driven projects to enhance and protect nature. So we've been feeding in the outcomes of this national conversation into our People's Assembly for Nature, as I said. And one of the ways we've done that is through, just flip back to the last slide, Emma, sorry. One of the ways that we've done that is we took a selection of the different comments in the people's words that submitted it, and we worked with this illustrator just to dramatise them, to bring them to life for people. So I've just got one of those. We had 45 different quotes that were chosen at random and dramatised, and this is just one of them, but I'm aware this copy is really small, so I'll just read it to you. It says, for those who live in urban areas, it provides green spaces where you can enjoy the changing seasons, get away from crowds, breathe fresh air, observe wildlife in its entirety, and exercise away from traffic. The variety of the natural world ranges from hills and mountains to coastal areas, forests, heaths and valleys, all of which have a huge benefit to one's mental health. So yeah, we sort of dramatised these images and fed them into our People's Assembly for Nature, which had its first weekend this weekend just gone. And I have to say, I'm still completely buzzing. It was the most incredible experience. We're running the People's Assembly across a series of 4 weekends, so two face-to-face and then 2 online. Our first weekend was face-to-face, and it brought together 100 people from across all 4 nations of the UK. They were selected to ensure that they were representative of people from all walks of life, and also to ensure that we had a diversity of perspective within the room. So we used from a Natural England survey some questions around connection to nature. So we had a real diversity of people for whom nature is a really important part of their lives, through to they don't see it as relevant to them at all, to ensure we've got that real mix of opinions within the room. And what our citizens are going to be doing is coming together over this series of 4 weekends to both agree a vision for the future of UK nature, and also to build recommendations for what needs to happen, a series of call to actions, if you like, for governments, for food and farming businesses, for NGOs like us, and for communities and individuals. And to give a bit of a flavour of the sort of things that they're hearing, the first weekend was really about what is nature and why do we need to protect and restore it. So a lot about what is nature, why does it matter, what is the biodiversity crisis, and how do we get here. We had some incredible speakers, including Tony Juniper, Sir John Lawton, Professor Bill Sutherland, Dr. Radhika Board, who's a specialist in just transition and cultural perspectives of nature, and a really incredible visioning exercise from Ella Saltmarsh and the Long Time Project, really getting people to think into the future and how they want it to be. So now we're busy prepping for weekends 2 and 3. So weekend 2 is all around protecting and restoring nature, looking at how we use our land and seas and the frameworks which are in place to protect nature. And also a little bit around our disconnection from nature, shifting baseline syndrome and the importance of nature connection. Weekend 3 is all around sustaining people in nature, so both understanding our reliance on land, water and sea and how it meets our basic needs, but then starting to get into how we can, in a fair and just way, reduce the pressures on nature, how we might redesign our systems and restore nature. Weekend 4, we're not currently planning any speakers, although our citizens are in the driving seat. So if they want to hear more speakers around different topics, we will go and find them. But weekend 4 is where the magic really happens, where this vision comes together, and the series of calls to action, which they'll start across the other weekends, will really be finalised, and the People's Plan for Nature will be born. And of course, the plan is just the beginning. So we'll then be looking at how we put it into action, using our Wild Isles campaign as a real springboard for that. We will be, as I think I've said, as organisations, we have committed to openly and transparently responding to every single call to action that the people come up with. And we will be inviting other organisations to respond in full as well. And then we'll be using our campaign to really drive forward the social, political and economic changes that are needed to address the nature and climate crises. We'll also be looking at how do we support individuals and communities to make the plan a reality, so that we end up with everybody acting together to restore and protect nature, both that kind of change on the ground and systems change that I talked about. So we'd love you to be part of this as well. So just on this final slide, a few thoughts on how you might get involved. So firstly, the Citizens Assembly. I should have said the Citizens Assembly is being, the content is being determined by an independent advisory group chaired by 2 academic leads, Professor Natalie Seddon at the University of Oxford and Professor Pete Smith at the University of Aberdeen. But we are putting ideas into that pot for different speakers and contents that might be helpful for our citizens to come up with their conclusions. And we're looking for speakers across those topics that I just shared. So we're looking for both kind of expert witnesses who can provide sort of facts and evidence, but also advocates, so that we're ensuring we're getting a range of different perspectives and case studies into the room, and people who've got relevant lived experience of the issues that are being discussed. We'd also love you to respond to the People's Plan. So as I said, we've committed to responding in full, and we'd love you to join us in doing that. And finally, on the campaign, as Emma said, we really want to work in partnership with others. We really want to use this public mandate to drive real change for nature. Everyone has a role to play, and so we'd love you to help us spread the word and be part of that change. Thank you. So I'm sure there are lots of questions. We'd love it if you could use the Q&A function to share your questions with us. And I believe you can kind of up and down vote others' questions as well. So the most popular ones will come to the top. There's one question in here already. If you have put your questions in the chat, if you could transfer them over to the Q&A function, that just helps Emma and I keep track of them. So one question that's come in from Sam Roberts, who asked, will the findings from the People's Plan be shared with NGOs outside of WWF, National Trust and RSPB? Absolutely, they will. This is the People's Plan for Nature. We're using our convening power as organisations to bring the People's Plan for Nature and the People's Assembly for Nature together, but it is the People's Plan. It is not our plan. It will be published. We'll support the citizens in publishing it and support them in getting media coverage. We'll be looking at training up the different participants within the Assembly to be spokespeople for it, but it is their plan. And as I said, we will be responding to it as well as helping make it a reality. Got an offer of a speaker. Thank you for that, Hilary. Yeah, I will definitely be in touch with you about that.
There's another question in the chat, Helen, which I don't think can be copied across, but the question is, will it be the same group of people invited each weekend, or will they change?
Really good question. So it will be the same group of people. We worked with an organisation called the Sortition Foundation, who are world-leading experts in recruiting to these kind of deliberative processes. And so, yeah, they work to ensure that this group is a mini UK public, is kind of representative of people of different genders, different demographic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, urban rural split, representatives from across the four different countries of the UK. And also it's really important to us that people go through the process as a whole, so they're hearing the kind of breadth of different evidence and perspectives. So it's a bit of a journey of learning and discussing and deliberation. So it's really important to us it's the same people throughout.
Another question was, when will the plan be published? So it will be published in spring 2023 to coincide with the launch of the public campaign.
Lots of questions coming in now.
Which they're all coming in now, Helen. Okay, next one is from Ruth. Says, will you also share how you've engaged this wide range of people to improve such engagement across the environmental sector?
Yes, Ruth, we will. So this is a really different way of working for us. RSPB has worked a lot with communities across the UK, but we've never done anything at this scale before. We've certainly never convened and commissioned a citizens assembly process before, and I think that's probably similar for our partners at WWF and the National Trust. So we're learning a huge amount from this, and so we will definitely be sharing both the outcomes of the People's Plan for Nature process, but also how our learnings in running this process as well with others across the environment sector. And we really want to, as we've said, we really want to work with partners to deliver it. This crisis requires us all to work in collaboration, so very keen to hold this process really, really openly, to work with partners on it, and to share the learnings as we go.
And then Jenny asked, when will TX date be confirmed for the Wild Owls TV series? So it's TBC, I can say. So it's obviously down to BBC programming, and they're just waiting to work out how long they might need for World Cup slots, actually. So once we know how long that will take up in the programming schedule, then they'll look in the TV series. So we're hoping we're going to announce a date later this year, but watch this space for now.
There's a question here from Jack around how the People's Plan is going to be presented to politicians and how we're going to advocate for action. So Jack, this is going to be led by the people as much as possible. So there is no obligation for our 100 citizens within the Assembly to do anything beyond be part of the Assembly. But for those who wish to do so, and we know from previous processes like Climate Assembly UK, if anyone's seen the People versus Climate Change, which is on iPlayer, and if you're interested in this kind of thing, really recommend giving it a watch, shows how being part of one of these processes really builds people's agency and really makes them want to do more. So for those participants that want to, we will provide onward training, both in terms of media training, advocacy training, and any other support that they need to allow them to really champion this and to act as advocates for the plan. And also, of course, we will put the influencing power of our own organisations behind it as well. So in terms of the sort of second part of that question is, will the focus be more on individual actions? We're absolutely looking at change across that system. So looking at the change across there'll be a series of call to actions for each of those different actor groups that I talked about, for national governments, local governments, for business, for citizens and communities, and for us as NGOs, and we'll be equally pushing for change across all of those different areas.
Just going through, there's lots more questions now. So there's a couple of questions. One is about approach to language when talking about people attending on the weekend workshops. Are we teaching them all of our jargon that we use across the sector, or are we actively avoiding it, or is it something in between?
That's a great question. So we're trying to run the process in plain English as much as possible. And we've had a team working to brief speakers to ensure that they are avoiding acronyms. We know as a sector we like an acronym, so looking to avoid acronyms and jargon as much as possible. Inevitably, when you've got, people who are experts in a very particular topic, then perhaps some of that might come through a little bit, but we are definitely ensuring that people fully understand what's being shared with them. So after each speaker session, there's an opportunity for people to call the speaker to their table. In the real life session online, they'll be able to call them to their breakout room. So if there is anything that they didn't understand, that we can kind of we can translate that for them, and they can ask for more clarity. And we're also, if they sort of having reflected on the session, they're absolutely in the driving seat. These processes are incredible. So if there is anything that they heard that they queried or want more information on, then the Citizens Assembly is being run by a charity called Involve. And Involve will then go away and work with our advisory panel and our academic leads to answer any kind of outstanding questions that they have.
There's another question here, Helen, about will people involved be collecting their thoughts from their own communities, or is it fed in as an individual perspective?
Oh, that's a really good question. So the people who are involved within the People's Assembly for Nature, the only expectation on them is to show up as they are, to bring their own perspective into the room. So you know, we all hold multiple identities, and so they're just there to represent themselves as an individual, rather than you know, the place where they live or their particular demographic background. We're not expecting them to represent that perspective at all. They're coming as an individual, and to bring their personal perspective into the room. And we hope that by having selected over 100 people into this process, that we will get that real diversity through bringing all of those people together.
And then Chloe asks, can you talk a bit more about how the campaign will empower individuals and communities to take action for nature? Will you be offering information, resources about actions they can do in their local areas? Do you want me to have a go at this one, Helen?
Yeah,
yeah. So I guess the short answer is yes, definitely. We'll be producing kind of toolkits and different assets. Basically, as Helen says, there'll be the report that comes from the People's Plan for Nature. But of course, you want to transfer that into different kind of creative assets so people can kind of share and champion and support it. So yes, there will be loads of those resources available, and we hope to make those available for others as well to actually spread that word. So we'll be closer to the time, creating an outreach list. So if you are working for an organisation who would like to be involved, we'd welcome kind of contact details at this point so we can put you onto mailing lists, but we're planning to produce kind of comms packs and toolkits and everything. So do let us know if you're interested to help support and spread the word.
So there's a question here from Richard around how are the Wildlife Trust and local authorities involved. I'll take each of those separately. So in terms of how the Wildlife Trust are involved, so we've been talking to colleagues from the Wildlife Trust as part of the design of both the People's Plan for Nature as a whole and through the People's Assembly for Nature. Lots of Wildlife Trusts helped promote the national conversation, which has been brilliant. And we had Rashir Shah as one from the Scottish Wildlife Trust as one of our speakers at the first weekend, and we're talking to the Wildlife Trusts about different speakers and different case studies that we can bring into the process over the weekends to come. In terms of local authorities, obviously there are lots of them, and we've been engaging, probably not with them as a group. I think we've been looking at where we might bring in some local authority case studies into the process of where they've been driving change, potential for speakers, and then sorry, I've forgotten the second part of my answer, but yeah, we're looking at how we work with local authorities within the process as speakers and case studies.
Steve Roberts says maybe a toolkit for how smaller local organisations can relate to smaller communities. That said, maybe just some guidelines so those organisations can adapt something on their own and empower commitment to the plan. So yeah, so as Helen mentioned, there'll be different ways that we want different actors to respond to the plan. So there will be a version for kind of local councils as well as how we want national governments to respond to it. And of course, there will be toolkits to support all of that. One of the things that we're hearing a lot from the kind of local governments is they need toolkits to not only kind of know what to do, but how to kind of actually encourage others to get involved and do something. So part of it is as much of it is a common challenge as it is in actually going and doing something. So including in that toolkit things about how we can kind of support behaviour change through communities and getting people out and doing something, and what kind of language to use is important. So as mentioned before about not using jargon, but it's, you know, how are we kind of keeping people power really positive, and what are the things that are going to make people going to want to take part and get kind of behind these projects and help push them through in their local communities, whether that's through their councils or whichever stakeholder, but kind of knowing that actually this is a way that you can communicate it in a way that results in positive change, rather than we're all quite used to, I think, kind of having these issues communicated on a negative way. So part of that is also part of that important thing to kind of mention is the language, and how that kind of comes through in supporting this and helping others talk about it as well is really important.
So there's a question here from Sarah about how we're connecting with community organisers who are already operating on the ground. So to take the first part of that question, so one way in which we're doing it is working to identify some case studies that we can bring into the People's Assembly for Nature process. But the second part of the question is how those organisers will get access to funding for their knowledge and experience. So anybody that comes to speak to our assembly is paid for their time, and as are our assembly members. Actually, we're ensuring that this process is as inclusive as possible. So we're both for our advisory group members, any speakers, and our participants within the process, they're all paid for their time. We ensure that travel costs are covered, that any funding or barriers around caring responsibilities that's provided for, and so on, to ensure that we're removing as many barriers to inclusion in this process as possible. On the point around funding, one of the things that we are working on is a pot of funding that people can apply to help them implement their People's Plan for Nature, and we hope to be able to share more information on that with you in due course.
David asked, will we be making suggestions for parish councils in England? They tend to have greater connection to local communities than regional councils. So I think, Helen, you'd thought about kind of landowners, hadn't you, as part of the plan?
Yeah, we have. So it's been quite challenging to work out exactly. We've only got 4 weekends with people, and exactly sort of what level of detail we can get into, and also the kind of the key actors to focus on. Parish councils aren't a particular target that we're focused on at the moment, but having said that, we are focusing a lot on the role of community action, and as you say, David, parish councils have really great connections into local communities, so I wouldn't be surprised if it came up. As I said, our citizens are absolutely in the driving seat with this process. If it's something that they want to explore and they want to bring in speakers on, then it's certainly something that we will do. So Emma, there's a question here from Kit around the action plan that supports the plan. It's our campaign. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I wish I could share all kinds of video assets and things with you, but there's obviously confidentiality, so I can't. So the campaign in itself will be giving different people roles to play. So whether you're sort of in your home life, in your communities, or at work, we know it's really, really important that people can obviously take part. And again, we saw that from our planet, is that people not only want to take part in their own lives, but they also want to understand the different roles that different actors play. So a lot of the questions that we'd get through on kind of social media and stuff would be like, this is all well and good and me doing my bit at home, but what's the role of businesses? What should they be doing? What should government leaders be doing? How should we hold them accountable? So through that campaign, we'll make it really, really clear of like, what are those things that you can do as individuals, but not putting the onus just on them, and saying that actually, yeah, we all have a part to play. This may be your part, but actually we also need this change to come from different areas. So it's equally important for us to say, actually, people wear different hats. They may be at home with their families and want something to do with their kids, but they also might, have a job, and in that job they are still passionate about nature and the environment because they care about it for their children. And so there's ways that we can support them to drive that change through their workplace too. So those toolkits and assets will also include things about how can they kind of create their own eco teams within the workplace, and all that kind of stuff. And obviously we don't know, we can't preempt what's going to come out of People's Plan. It is very much down to those participants, but we will be ready to respond to it. So therefore, those ones that are very top line and we can say, actually, we think these are going to have the biggest impact, we will promote them through the campaign and create them to this sort of easy shareable toolkit. So really sort of top tips and getting kind of celebrities behind us to say, actually, if it's about doing X, here's how you can do it. Here's an example of what good looks like. And putting people at the frame of that too. So not just about sort of traditional influencers that you might think of in terms of celebrities or kind of YouTube stars, but actually the people who are at the front of this doing this. So actually here's I think if you've seen the People versus Climate Change, you will have seen Sue, whose journey was like absolutely incredible, and she sort of started off not really understanding what climate change was, and then by the end of it she was like super empowered and was like pushing for like local charging points, I think, in her car park. And so it's about how do we show some of those amazing stories as well of the people that come through this assembly process, and how do we kind of champion them and what they're doing, and really this is about us creating a platform for others. So it's about kind of creating that movement, but we know we can kick this off, but we do need others to snowball it and run with it, if it's going to have the change that we want.
Thanks, Emma. We've got 5 minutes left, but I'm hoping we can get through these last few questions in that time. There's kind of a related question to the one that you were just answering, Emma, around business, and are we considering businesses within the plan? So yes, we absolutely are considering businesses in the plan. And the follow-up part of that question, which I think is one for you, Emma, is how can businesses make a difference, and how can they put nature at the heart of their decision making?
Yeah, so luckily we're producing a film just on that. So we're producing a 30-minute film, which if you haven't seen similar ones we did one called Our Planet, Our Business. And so in a similar vein, we're looking at, for Wild Isles, what is it that business leaders need to do? It's got some incredible speakers in there. We actually filmed with Deborah Meaden last week. So yeah, we're basically, it's a bit of myth busting, as well as anything. So what we often hear a lot from businesses is they don't know how to kickstart the journey. They're not sure what the right thing to do is. They don't have all the information needed. But this is, for us, is about saying you've got to do something. So in this film, we'll sort of say this is what good does look like currently. What are the gaps that we don't know? How can everyone just be doing sort of something? And what does that good look like? So there'll be an overall 30-minute film that we can host screenings for with retailers. That will be available on YouTube, and we'll do premiere events. So again, do get in touch if you're keen to do that. But everyone can host these screenings. It's what they're designed to do. And then there'll also be kind of 3 more sort of specifically focused in film. So one is about kind of marine in general, looking at that habitat, what needs to be done in that landscape. The other is food and farming, which is equally as important. And then the other key one, for which we know is really important, is finance. So businesses can do loads, but like one of the top things they can do, for example, is switching their divestments. So where your pensions go or whatever may actually be going on to fund all the damaging stuff. And actually this is a great way that all businesses can kind of get behind it, but looking at systemically, what are those the leaders in that space doing, and how can we all learn from it and do better? And so it's about kind of convening those actors in that space. So there'll be specific events created to launch those assets throughout 2023. They will be staggered, and yeah, we'll share all of that in our kind of comms plans and things as well. So if you are interested, please do share your email addresses in the chat, and we'll try and get back to you and put you on our mailing list if that's interesting for you.
Thanks,
I think we've got 2 questions left.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions left. So one of them's from Mark around how we're going to affect systems change. And some of that Emma's just talked to about the role of business advocacy. We've talked a bit this afternoon around political advocacy. So we're going to be putting the weight of our 3 organisations behind driving forward the recommendations for government action that our citizens come up with, and we'll look at other ways of driving that change as well, depending on what our recommendations are that come through the People's Plan for Nature. It's a really different way of planning a campaign. It's not without its challenges. We're very much putting citizens in the driving seat, but we feel it's really, really important. The crisis affects everyone, so it's really important that everybody has their say in how we solve it. So just one final question is, are we starting from a blank sheet of paper, or are we building from context? So we're absolutely building from context. There's a bit of a blank sheet for our citizens in terms of the vision they want to see, the future that they want to get to, but in terms of then informing how we get to that vision, how we get to where we want to be, they're absolutely hearing from a range of different speakers about the context that we find ourselves in, the reason nature's in crisis, some of the existing policy mechanisms, business actions, community actions that are taking place, what's working, what's not, and why that is, so that they can then come up with a really clear recommendation for change. So I think we're just about out of time, but we have got through most of your questions. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope that's been interesting. And if you would like to discuss partnership or hear any more about the campaign, then please do get in touch.